My brief today is to talk about higher education and the role of private players. The truth is that today in our country, how many of you went to a private school at the school level? Most of you, right? At the undergraduate level, how many of you are going to a private college? Yeah, about half of you, right? Therein lies the lament in our country. Most people, even in rural India, in remote villages, will send their child to a private school. But when it comes to private colleges, including places like Jindal and Ashoka, people are very skeptical and everybody thinks you're a crook. I often tell people that in my entire professional experience, whether it was as a researcher, whether it was as an academic briefly, whether it was as a management consultant, whether it was as a corporate CEO, whether it is now as an entrepreneur, generally I've been treated with a lot of respect, and people sort of, give you some credit for your education and your achievements, and they treat you with some deference and they listen to you. But every time I have a meeting with any sort of official or some uninformed parents or students about Ashoka or ISB, the assumption is that we are out there to make money, that the quality of the education will not be what it is promised, and that somehow or the other we have to prove to them whether we have a proposition that is worth taking up or not. All of you know this. I don't know if I have any answers to how we can solve for this, but perhaps we can spend a few minutes talking about how this has come to pass, and then open it up for questions and comments by all of you. The challenge is that while we tout the number of GER of about 20%, everybody know what GER is. This is the whole notion of gross enrollment ratio, which basically says that of the cohort or age group of people who are eligible to be in college, which is roughly between 18 and 25, only 20% get to college in India, right? Now this is a government reported figure and it has a lot of, I believe, sort of loosey-goosiness in it. But let us for a minute assume that 1 in 5 is going to college. By the time you get to rural India, by the time you get to male versus female, you are down to something like 1 in a roughly 150 people here in the room in rural India of women who are going to college. So it's quite stark, the problems that we have in our country. Now the question is, what should the benchmark be, right? So as of today, I think the number in China is upwards of 30%, okay? The number in the United States is around 60%, right? The number in Thailand or Malaysia would be something like 40-45%. So we have a long way to go. The challenge we have is that every percentage counts for a large number of educational institutions, right? So if you look at where we are today, the roughly quoted number is that India today, to educate about 30 million students, okay, which is that 20% GER, which is prevalent, has 600 universities and 45,000 colleges, okay? Now the government would like to take a GER number from the current roughly 15-20% to 30%, I don't even remember what that date is, by say, is it 2020 or 2030, do any of you remember? But some such time frame within the next 10 years, okay? Their ambition is to double the enrollment in our country in the next 10-15 years. To double the enrollment, if you follow current educational models of faculty to student ratio, space to student ratio, and so on, you would need to double our education system. you would need to build 500 new universities and another 50,000 new colleges. So it's staggering the enormity of the challenge that we face in terms of building capacity for the need and demand for higher education in our country. I often like to say that this is the challenge is of a proportion that we as a human race have never had to face, right? So there are many problems that, you know, you are a small developing country, you say, okay, I have to build a few universities. What's an example of how India did it or how China did it? But at this scale and at this size, in this kind of time frame, with this kind of pressure, it has never been attempted in human history. And therefore, the real big opportunity for us in India as we build and extend our higher education system is to almost be the path breakers in saying, how do you scale up so quickly and so fast when you build colleges and universities, okay? So it's actually on one hand very exciting because never in the history of the human race has somebody had to face the challenge of building colleges and universities so fast, so quickly, in the terms of size, in terms of the size of capacity building that we need. But where are we today? We are really, really struggling. And the struggle is really because of why you are all here. The struggle is that the big problem with our higher education system is the challenge of policy and governance. So if I move quickly to the topic at hand, which is around private universities or private higher education, what has happened in our country is till about 70s and 80s, all of the higher education in the country was largely driven by public or government owned. There was the usual bits and the Tata Institutes, which effectively had been handed over to the government, whether it's a TIFR or a TIS, and several institutions that were set up as a private sector had become part of larger universities. So, an example would be the Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies in Bombay, set up as a private initiative but folded into Mumbai University. So if you really look at private higher education in the country, it was almost non-existent about 30 years ago, right? The most prominent was probably, of quality was probably the BITS, the Birla system of BITS in Pilani and BITS in Mesra and so on. And there used to be a smattering of colleges that people would have. But these colleges would all be affiliated to public universities, and therefore for all practical purposes they were just an extension of the government system. There were rules around fees, the curriculum was all driven by these government universities, and that model, by the way, persists even today. Somewhere in the 70s and 80s there was pressure on the government to start expanding the system, and that's when they actually started to deregulate and reform. Now, the general impression among some quarters is that India's higher education system is highly liberalized. And the reason they say that is because if you look at the last 30 years, what has happened is there's been a large number of private higher education institutions that have entered, so much so that today nearly two-thirds, nearly about 65 to 70% of all numbers of institutions are private, and nearly two-thirds of enrollment is actually private. Now, this is a staggering number. The reason it is a staggering number is that education around the world, as you all will know, has always been treated as a public good. And if it's a public good, it is assumed that, like health, education will be provided by the government. In India, because the government has not been able to provide for resources for higher education and brought in private players, very quickly private higher education has expanded to the extent that it is actually 2/3 of all higher education in our country. And this is the highest in the world by far, okay? The United States, where people admire the higher education system so much, and I'm sure several of you would have wanted to go and study there or will go and study there. I don't know the exact numbers, but the numbers are more in the 20-30% range rather than in the 60-70% range. By the way, for school education as well, our numbers are very high. Our numbers are more like 40% there, which is again some of the highest in the world. In China, for example, which is a comparable country in many ways, though not economically, the percentage of private higher education and percentage school education is actually less than 10%. So it's actually single digits. Most of it is dominated by government and public colleges and universities. So what has happened is that there's been a massive mushrooming of private colleges and universities in our country. And so everybody assumes that liberalization ho gaya, right? Because there are so many private colleges and universities. What people don't realize is that the quality of these universities and colleges is actually very, very poor in 90% of them. And in the process, the public universities have also declined, okay? Now, let me tell you why this is true, and actually at that point I will stop because I don't want to keep going on by myself and let you have ask me questions. What has happened, sometimes you take policy decisions which end up having what are called unintended consequences, right? Or perverse outcomes. Very different from what you intended for them to be. So what they did was they created these private university laws, whether I'm not getting into the specifics of the laws, which allowed private players to come in and set up colleges. But because everybody was suspicious of what the private players might do and that they might provide poor quality education, that they may charge capitation fees, and that they may make lots of money of unsuspecting, innocent, needy students and parents, they said, let's control it really tightly. So we'll allow them, but we want to be very, very sure that we give it to the right people and we'll control it very tightly. So what happened was that on one hand we opened it up, but we actually created a license Raj. We actually went back in time. In fact, in other sectors where we were allowing private sector to come in, we were abolishing license Raj, which is what the whole sort of reforms that happened in the country 25 years ago happened. But in the sector of higher education, we actually created license Raj. So what happened was it was very difficult to get approval to start a new institution if you were a private player. So good people, and I count, if you may, me amongst one of them, when we would go to ask for permission to start up, it would be so difficult and onerous that you would kind of give up. So for example, it took us 2 years of all kinds of shenanigans and reviews and committees and paperwork to get the approval to start a new university like Ashoka in Haryana. In Hindi, you have this term of papad belna. You really had to belo papads bleed and sweat to get it done. And I can tell you more about the stories as we go into the question answer session. So what happens is that good people then get turned off, right? And this is what used to happen in the license Raj also. License Raj had become crony capitalism, right? Whoever has contacts, whoever has money, whoever has political connections can get the license to make scooters or bulbs or refrigerators and make lots of money. And that is what used to happen in our country before those laws were reformed in 1991. Here, what we did was we recreated the 70s and 60s ka license Raj for higher education So whoever knew the political masters or whoever had the money to pay cash under the counter was able to get a license to start a university. And of course these people were not really interested in providing good higher education, because they tended to be people who came from the world of business or entrepreneurship and had lots of surplus cash that was getting generated, and this was a great way of converting black money into white, right? So it's a great way to set up the facade of a not-for-profit institution and skim money off the back. So I know a vice chancellor and sort of quote-unquote promoter of a private university not so far away from here, which is a thriving private university, who has a Mercedes-Benz and a BMW of the highest sort of model, one different one for each day of the week. And he goes around with a bunch of gun-toting bodyguards, I don't know why, but really to show off from what I can tell. And in fact, he has a PR guy who makes sure that wherever he goes, a bunch of local media are paid off to come and take pictures and write about him. Now it may seem that I'm making a caricature and coming up with something dramatic to make my point, but this is a real story and I know this person. So there are people like him who are quintessentially the ones who are building institutions today, because they have the clout and the power to in fact be able to get the approvals. I won't take names here because we are being recorded, but the fact is that in most states, if you want to get a private university license, you have to dole out cash, and there are price points for this. So for example, in some states the number is about 20 crores. These are not small sums of money. Before I go there, I forgot to mention one key point. So as the private players started to come in, as the so-called reforms and liberalization happened, as I said, they tended to be players who had clout, who had money, who had land somewhere, and they soon realized that this was a real cash cow. This, you built universities and students would come and pay because they are desperate, and you generate huge surpluses and you live a good life and you build more colleges and you build more universities, and voila, you can now run for elections. Several of them became politicians. And in fact, if you know, most politicians have some education society, some education trust, some college, some university somewhere, right? A lot of campaign funds come from educational institutions for these people. It's a good way to earn money for 5 years, spend it on an election, go back and earn money for another 5 years, spend it for the next election. But as this became popular as a way to make money and to win popularity, because you can also look good that you've built a university, you can also do people favors by admitting their children into the school or college that you have. It works quite nicely for individuals who want that kind of life. The people at the state level said, oh, listen, we didn't know this, but higher education is a concurrent subject in the Constitution, which means we at the state level can decide who should get private university status. And so there was a horde of private universities that started getting formed in the state level as well, because states decided to create private university acts or allow individual universities to become state private universities. So we are actually sitting in Jindal University, which was the first state private university in Haryana. And just so you know, within 5 years or so of Jindal, we were at Ashoka, which is just 10 minutes away, I think the 16th or 17th private university in Haryana. And similarly, as you go to states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, several of them have a large number of private universities that have started under the state private university acts. And so this is a, if you want to call it a racket that the states also got into. and further fueled this whole growth of private universities. Now, this is where a vicious cycle has started. Look what happens. You create very tight regulations because you are suspicious that the private guys who will come in will not be ethical, they will put up poor quality, they don't care about education, they only care about making money, and they are going to take advantage of our unsuspecting and needy students. So you set in very high regulations. Now, the only people who can get past those regulations in terms of licenses are people who have clout, money, black money, land, who are genuinely not actually interested in education per se, but other commercial sort of intent. So those are the only people who come in. They then, in fact, do all of the things that you thought you are going to prevent by setting up onerous regulation. Because what happened is that once they got in, it was very difficult to monitor what they were doing. I still joke about the fact that today, if you are able to get a license to set up a university, you can go do whatever you want. There's nobody to regulate you. So-called there is regulator, but the fact is they can't regulate 600 universities and 55,000 colleges. So people go do murder and get away with it. So once you get past the gate, you can do whatever you want, right? And so these guys ended up doing exactly what was supposed to not happen, which is charge capitation fee, not really care about what was the quality of the education, and so on and so forth. You know the story. So as a result, you end up with very poor quality institutions. And generally we know that. That's why we are all skeptical. You hear nightmare stories of what's happening with these private universities. This then gets back to the policy makers and they say, inko aur tight karo. We need to have more regulation. We need to be even tighter about how we are going to fix this. So you end up in a vicious cycle, as you can see, where you tighten regulation, you end up with the wrong kind of people coming in, you end up with poor quality institutions, you end up with students and parents being very unhappy, going back to the policy makers who say, okay, tighten it more, and then you end up into this vicious cycle. That's where we are right now. Everybody understands this, from the UGC to the MHRD to the states to the central government. What do you think the problem is? The problem is that even though they know the answer, it's very difficult to unwind this. Because if you say now that I will loosen all the regulation and make it easier, everybody is scared that those 600 universities and 50,000 colleges who are gross violators will start violating even more. So how do we control them, right? And so we are caught in this bind where just because we've created a system that is corrupt, you are afraid to reform the system because the corrupt people will become more corrupt, right? And so as you deliberate policy making at this conference, I hope that all of you bright minds will come up with an answer to this challenge of how do you break these vicious cycles of policy that you get into. In my limited brain, I have an answer to this which I might share with you as we go along, but it's very difficult to implement. And it really requires leadership. Maybe one of you will one day become the HRD minister of this country and have the leadership and the courage to make some of these happen. So anyway, I will stop here because I think it's getting a bit boring with me talking non-stop. And I'd love for you to ask questions, any question, and I'll try and do my best to answer.
Sir, you said that one of the problems is that GER is presently about 20%, which is quite less. But there is already a shortage of jobs. So how will, in the present scenario, if you first focus on improving this GER, the enrollment ratio, it will be a solution?
So I think what do you do? Look at the opposite scenario, right? You say that because the jobs are not there, let's not educate our people. Isn't it?
Improving jobs, creating more jobs, and then we should go on to creating more.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If you do that, then what do you do to the aspirations of the population which wants the education despite not having, knowing that they don't have jobs, right? Who at least want to be able to compete for the jobs that are available, right? So unfortunately you can't say कि educate नहीं करेंगे क्योंकि jobs नहीं है. There is no sequence to this. You see what I'm saying? You can't say to people, okay, please don't come because I don't have jobs. It's not like a door you can open and say, okay, only 106 seats in this room, the rest of you remain outside. So you have to do both, is what I'm saying. You cannot sequence it.
The thing is, if they pay so much money for getting education, and if they don't get the returns, then in that case also they will be unhappy only.
It is true, and that is what is happening, right?
People by
Equally, if you are going to expand the sector, then you need trained people, right? So I don't think it's an either or, is the point I'm making. Both from the aspirations of the people or from the point of view, you know, our Prime Minister is saying make in India, right? But people are saying, where are the engineers? Where are the civil engineers? Where are the chemical scientists that I need, right? So I think it's a, human resources and talent is very closely connected, as you are rightly saying, to the jobs. But they go hand in hand. You cannot sequence it, because today you say, okay, I'm going to work on providing the jobs. Industry will come back and say, I can't find people. You hear that today, right? People are saying that, you know, you may have a demographic dividend, but when I need to hire good quality people, I have to interview 100 people to get one person, right? So these are all interconnected problems, and I'm not disagreeing with you that the jobs is also important. But I think they have to go hand in hand. In fact, what has happened in the skills space, right? You know, you hear a lot about skill development in this country. In fact, there's another program, right, the Prime Minister has around skilling also, right? I don't remember what, Skill India, right? The problem there is that so much money has been spent on skilling. You have the National Skill Development Corporation that is supposed to have doled out thousands of crores. The problem there again is that there aren't jobs for those people. So those people come and get skilled, and then what do they do about it, right? So what you are highlighting is a very important issue, and I should have touched on it, and thanks for bringing it up. But the thing is that two have to go hand in hand.
Questions. First is, so we as parents are obsessed with sending our children to private schools. But when it comes to higher education, we prefer public or government institutions over private education. So why that? Second,
so can I take them one at a time, because
yes.
I'm getting old and I can't keep track of 2, 3 at one time. So on that one, I think I touched upon that in the beginning. I think the problem is that the quality of higher education institutions in general has been very poor. And so the perception is that everybody is a crook who's starting a private university, and that they are necessarily going to provide you a poor quality education. They state big things but are not able to deliver on those, and so on. So there's a general perception around this that says that this is, you know, you should not go for private because they will rook you, or they will. Now somehow what has happened is, in private schools have existed for a long time. You know, even the old missionary schools and so on were private schools, and they were run by good people. So there's a general perception that private schools are okay, people don't fool around, though people fool around in the schools also, right? But there's a general perception, and you know, perception matters a lot. So general perception is schools may, people really take care of your children, and in fact if you can afford to pay more, they will get a better education. And also the last thing I'll say on that is that generally public schools have been pretty bad, right? The government schools have a bad reputation, that there are no teachers, the infrastructure is poor. If you go to a Kendriya Vidyalaya or a Navodaya school, then you get good education, but you know, general government schools are very poor quality. They are for poor people, they are for the socio-economic backward people, and so on and so forth. That kind of segregation and classification is not there in higher education. So those are some of the reasons why. So what's your second one?
So my second question is, what is quality of education for you in higher education institutions?
My simple measure for quality of education is, are the students happy?
Okay.
I think if the students are happy, if their eyes are shining, if they say, yes, this is what I came here for, and I'm getting it, and I'm very happy with my peer group, my faculty, then I think that's what quality should be. The other objective measure of quality is that employers should say the same thing. They should say, listen, I came here, I was looking for this quality of student, and I'm getting that quality of student. I went to this institution for my engineers, I went to this institution for my commerce graduates, I went to this institution for my liberal arts graduates, and I got what I expected.
And my third question is, what is your motivation behind starting private institutions like ISB and Ashoka?
That's a larger question. I think, listen, initially there was no motivation. It was another interesting project to do. I used to work at McKinsey, and our managing director at that time decided that he would help build a management institution in India. I thought it was an interesting project. He thought I would be an interesting guy to work on it because I had an academic background, even though I never had a business education. As I started building it, I started to learn a lot. And even after ISB was launched in 2001 and I became the first dean, for me it was a project. I didn't think I was reforming education or I was changing lives or reforming higher education. I didn't have any such pretension. By the way, nor do I now, but I'll come to that. But the idea was project hai, karna hai, अच्छे से करना है. But by then what had happened was that I had started to realize that we were failing large number of our young people by not giving them the quality of education that they deserve. Right? And I think that was what was started to bother me a lot. Because as I started to build ISB, I saw what was happening around us. By then, AICTE had given permission to 996 business schools in the country in 1997-98 when we went to get permission. And then I realized, and then they asked me for 1 crore rupees of cash as a bribe to get the approval. I don't know if many of you know, the top private business school in this country is unrecognized and unregulated and unaccredited in India. The top private business school in this country is unrecognized, unregulated and unaccredited in India. He just got a certificate, no diploma, no degree. If he goes to another university and says, I spent 1 year full time at ISB and I spent 25 lakhs getting that education, and I did 640 contact hours and 32 courses, he gets 0 credit for it in this country. So what was my motivation, right? I think what happened was that, thank you. What happened was, I told you I was getting old. What happened was that after ISB became successful, then I realized that there was something going on that I had cracked, which allowed you to build a top-notch, high-quality, world standard institution in India from scratch, right? That realization was very inspiring. Suddenly you realize कि यार ये कर सकते हैं. It's like when you how many of most of you must be traveling Indigo Airlines, right? But this is a world-class operation, despite the fact that Modi Luft and Kingfisher and Sahara have all collapsed and gone to. Here's a guy who's buying, I don't know if any of you know this, but Indigo is going to buy a new plane, induct a new plane every 11 days into its fleet for the next 9 years. It's a staggering statistic. And yet, look at their service, look at their quality, I don't travel any other airline. And wherever I go, I say it's the best airline in the world. So you can create institutions, businesses, organizations in our country with all our problems, okay, which are truly top-notch. This year, ISB within its 15 years of existence has entered the top 100 research management institutions in the world. Genuine research coming out of ISB, which is peer-reviewed and goes into top journals today, is cumulatively more than all other management institutions and academics combined in this country. Now, this sounds self-promotional, but that's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is that you can, from scratch, create institutions of high quality from nothing, right? Jindal Law School today is probably the top private law school in this country, right? Similarly, very quickly, Ashoka has become that, right? And so that's when the motivation came that can we take this and try it out in other fields. So then the Young India Fellowship was born, which is now 5 years old, has been very successful. This year we had 4,000 people apply for the 200 fellow positions. We then started the undergraduate program at Ashoka and so on. Now the motivation really is how can I take a lot of these learnings and drive better quality in existing institutions. Because I get the feeling that, the people who go to ISB and the people who go to Ashoka will do fine anyway, right? Even if ISB or Ashoka were not around. But what about the people who are not getting to these institutions? What about the people who are not able to get to an IIT or an IIM or an NIT or a triple IT or whatever, right? What about the large numbers of people who are not able to access high quality education? What can we do for them? So one of the things I'm now motivated to do is really to go to struggling educational institutions and say, give me your school, let me try to fix it for you. At least the children who are there will get a good education.
So my college, like Ashoka, used to have a 4-year liberal arts program at the undergraduate level in Pune. But that was disallowed because UGC then banned 4-year...
Were you at Symbiosis?
Flame.
Flame, yeah.
So now we've had to discontinue the 4-year program. And it's been cut down to a 3-year liberal arts program, which seriously hampers the structure that was of the curriculum that was initially proposed.
You are telling me, yes.
So I'm saying, how do you then work around a system that is actively preventing innovative methods of education from, coming to fruition?
You wait for you to become MHRD minister. There is no answer. I mean, it's really sad. I don't know if you know the history of why that happened, right? And it doesn't answer your question, but it's really a symptom of what is wrong in our country. So when the Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, we are collateral damage, basically. And the collateral damage starts with politicalization of the university campuses. So what happened was, the Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, in his wisdom, decides that he's going to introduce a 4-year curriculum. Now, leave aside how he did it, whether it was right, wrong, badly planned, badly executed, bad decision, bad process, whatever. He decides to do it, he implements it. Now, because the regime of the day is a Congress regime, and because he went to St. Stephen's College in some years, and he uses Kapil Sibal and Shashi Tharoor and Manmohan Singh, whose daughter teaches at Stephens and so on, though she was opposing this whole thing, he uses his contacts to naturally push things through, right? Because to push things through and to get UGC approval and so on, you have to go and stand in front of people and say, please, please, please. So he uses his contacts, right? Suddenly he gets branded as a Congress guy. The decision becomes a Congress decision. Therefore, the teachers union, which has a left and a right, the students union, which has a left and a right, decides we have to oppose it. Then when the elections come around, they quietly go and tell the BJP masters, which they are connected to, कि आप अपने manifesto में डाल दो कि 4-year at Delhi University will be reversed. They said, but why should we put this in? The Delhi BJP guys and the teachers and the students say, no, if you put this in, it will help you with the local election, which, by the way, Mr. Modi got badly trounced in, right? Because young people and students and teachers and parents in Delhi hate this 4-year system. Nobody wants this 4-year system. This was imposed on us. It's 1 extra year. Nobody appreciates it. All of this, right? People are disgruntled. You'll get their vote. So this gets added into the manifesto. Nobody pays attention to it. You and I, who are even politically aware, read this in the manifesto and we say this can't be true, right? Why would a national election manifesto have a line saying reverse FYUP in Delhi University? But that was the line in the manifesto of the BJP. So they come to power and they say, okay, our first election is Delhi elections. You all will remember that. The whole thing that happened with Kejriwal and re-election and so on. So they say, okay, jaldi se kar do. So as soon as they came in, they decided to make the change because the next year's session was starting, elections were coming. So they pushed the change through, thinking ki iska to kuch hoga nahi. The moment they pushed the change, the guys in the UGC said, hello, last year we said yes. 2 years ago, now you are asking us to change, it makes us look bad. Then the other side on the teachers union and the students union started protesting. So it became a huge issue. So okay, now how do we tackle this? He said, okay, the way to tackle this is to change the policy for everyone. To say in this country you can't do 4 years. It's not for Delhi University, we are changing policy for everyone. So flame becomes collateral damage, Ashoka becomes collateral damage, SNU, Shivnadar becomes collateral damage, Symbiosis becomes collateral damage, all of us become collateral damage, IIT Kanpur becomes collateral damage. This is the ridiculous way in which our political system and our policy making works in this country. All I can say is this is the price we pay for democracy. At least I can sit here and on camera be recorded saying this, right? In some other country, if I said this, my legs and many other parts of my body would have been cut off.
So there are two parts to the question, so I'll go one by one. Firstly, because private institutions have to fund themselves, so they are a little costly. So they have a very different target group. Now, because the person who can afford a pre-college good education has an ability to enter a good college, if we want to make this education system a little more inclusive, then what models of education should we look forward to? This is the first part, sir.
Very simple, and most people don't know this, but we do this at Ashoka and we do this at ISB as well. Make the rich pay for the poor. Very simple. The way it works at ISB is, listen, if you go to ISB, you graduate with a 25 lakh job on average. Why should we give a free education to a guy who gets employed with a 25 lakh job after they graduate? Why? You shouldn't. But your point of inclusive is great. So if he comes from a poor family, there's a single mother who's a school teacher, they don't have money to fund a 25 lakh education, what do? We bring in a bank, we say, listen, no collateral, purely the ISB certificate is the collateral, okay? Give this guy a 25 lakh loan so that he can actually get this education. In a way, you stand guarantee, and that person gets the education, goes out, gets the job and pays back. I can tell you that in the 15-year history of ISB, there has not been a single default. Not a single default. Banks line up to give loans to our students, because their costs go down. You see, if you are a banker or if you're a finance guy, you know that the whole cost of interest is partly borrowing cost, or the cost of funds, but part of it is just the factoring in the failure of the loans or the default on the loans. Our default rates are zero. It's highly, highly profitable for the banks to be able to give loans to ISB students, right? The others is what we are trying to do at Ashoka, where our point is, listen, scholarships is only need based. It's not merit based, okay? If you are rich and smart, you shouldn't get a scholarship. You should still pay. So we have a high fee rate, which everybody has to pay. And if you are a person who doesn't actually have the wherewithal to pay, then from that high fee rate, we subsidize and give scholarships to other people. So 60% of students at Ashoka get some form of scholarship. 10 to 15% of students at Ashoka get a full scholarship. So the problem with all of these is that these models are understood. This is a solved problem. This is not, you don't have to discover the chromosome here. But we don't realize that these problems are solved. We just have to implement in our country. Of course, we can do more, we can do better. But even these things we are not able to implement. The final answer to this is that ultimately the funding that the government is providing to the public system, which is actually being frittered away, and this is the same concept of subsidy versus direct benefit transfer, right? The direct benefit transfer should go to the student. Let the student choose where they want to spend the money, right? Today the money is going to the government institutions. there's leakage in the system, there's inefficiencies in the system, the quality is poor, right? If you turn the thing around and give the power to the student to decide where he's going to take the subsidy and use it, you'll see a massive reform in the system and it becomes much more inclusive. So there are many ways in which system can be made inclusive. It needs the leadership for somebody to come in and make some of these things happen.
Hello. Yeah, in the second part of the question, so the private institutions have to compete with the public universities, and it's typically hard for them to compete on the research basis because the funding opportunities are a little different. They have to work on grants, and the natural choice for the good professor is to choose a public institution over a private institution because of a lot of other reasons, especially the job security and the funding that they get while doing the research. Specifically in the cases of IIT. So in this scenario, a lack of good faculty and a good facility, how will private institutions actually compete with public institutions?
But they are competing. I don't agree with that. I think there are people who will go to public institutions.
Sir, when we are when we compare any IIT with any other private engineering college, we don't have any equivalent engineering college.
But it's not a fair comparison. No, you are comparing apples and oranges, right? America also has MIT and Caltech, and it has third-rate engineering colleges, right? So I don't think that analogy really works. And by the way, please understand that, we are so obsessed with IITs in our country that we don't pay attention that these are outliers that prove the rule, right? So the question really is, your point about public versus private needs to be evaluated at the mass level. Okay? If you want to evaluate it at the IIT level, then let's talk about ISB versus IIM, right? Because there is no private university of the IIT quality at the engineering level. Can that be created? Absolutely. I can build as many private engineering institutions to go head to head with IIT if the regulations in this country allowed us to compete head to head with the IITs. In fact, the IITs would be destroyed. The only way we will solve the problem is that all of us, everybody sitting in this room who has the privilege of having a college education, has to commit to spending 2 hours to 3 hours in the classroom every week for 28 weeks in the year when you have 2 regular semesters. That is the only way we will be able to solve problems. We will all go through a faculty development program where I'll teach you how to teach, because just because you are educated doesn't mean that you know how to teach. Okay? And if you are going to teach Physics 101, you are going to take the Physics 101 online lecture that is there by the best physics lecturer at Caltech. You are going to bring it into the classroom, and you are going to stand in front of the students and teach them through those lectures. That is the only way to solve the problem. Otherwise, this student to faculty ratio of 2:1 is a simple thing. 20:1 is a simple thing, right? Most universities try to plan around 20:1 or 15:1. So you think about it, if you have to educate 30 million people more every year, do the math, you need at least 1 million more teachers, faculty as you call it. आज के दिन में faculty नहीं मिल रहे, 1 million और कहाँ से आएंगे? So technology and all of us have to play a role. This model of PhDs and academics and research guys only being able to teach will never get us there. Then you've lost the match. So that's the other.
Sir, taking inspiration from the Russia's Project 5-100, which is a initiative to basically increase the competitiveness of Russian universities and get them into the top 100 rankings. Should India consider something like that and empower probably like 50 universities in every sense and help them achieve global excellence, or should we not care about university rankings, international university rankings, and have a different approach?
I think the two questions are very different. I think as far as university rankings are concerned, it doesn't matter, right? I think if we just focus on quality, our rankings will go up. So I don't think we should be driven by ranking. Rankings will be an outcome. It can't be a means. But to your point, absolutely. I think we have talked about this. Again, these are solved problems. China also has a program. No, I forget the name of that program. So China and Russia have done this. You have to do it, and this is the way to break that vicious cycle. One of the ways to break the vicious cycle is to say, कि ये top 100, I trust you, आपको जो करना है करो. You have as much freedom as a Harvard or a MIT that to go out and do whatever you want, right? That is what Russia is doing. They're saying, okay, I will give you extra resources. Now in this country, we have tried this. I don't know if you know, there was an innovation university bill that the Congress and UPA government talked for 10 years. I'm sure you will find drafts of it if you are on the internet. You can do a search and you will find pages and pages on the innovation universities concept. I don't know if you remember, but in the recent budget, the Prime Minister personally included the idea of creating 10 public and 10 private universities who would be given complete freedom to become institutions of excellence. I was very involved in that formulation myself because I feel that the only way to break the system is to create a new system and then fold the existing system into that. And this is exactly, I've been a consultant to Chandrababu Naidu during my McKinsey days. So this time when he became elected, I went to him and we have practiced this exactly in Andhra Pradesh. So in Andhra Pradesh, if you go and study, there's a new Private University Act. And in that Private University Act, we removed all the barriers to entry. Okay? But to take care of this problem that people worry that, okay, now the bad guys will make hay while, we are opening the gates. We said, no, existing people can't come into this. Only new people can come into this. Okay? So that's one way to say, okay, yes, there is a haves and have-nots, we'll live with that. Because there's the only way to break this cycle, right? The second thing that he has done, and you can check that, it says that all universities will be given approval by an expert committee. Guess who's on the expert committee? Pramath Sinha, Anand Sudarshan, Swati Piramal, and 2 vice chancellors of Andhra Pradesh universities. There is no bureaucrat, there is no government official, there is no politician. This is path breaking. This is completely path breaking. For somebody, मैंने इतने पापड़ बेले यूनिवर्सिटी स्टेटस के लिए, मैं अब गवर्नमेंट के बिहाफ पे लोगों को यूनिवर्सिटी स्टेटस दे रहा हूं. But the reason he does that, because he trusts that the 5 of us will not do anything that will hurt the interest of the people or the state of Andhra Pradesh, nor we will take any money, nor will we have any vested interest. Okay? These kinds of things really break the cycle, and that's what Russia is doing, and that's what China is doing. China, in fact, has this program where they track all the guys doing PhDs in the US and track them, grab them and bring them back to China the moment they are finished. None of these Chinese PhDs are now working in America. And if you really think about it, what are they doing? They are basically outsourcing PhD programs to the United States. They are saying, I need 1 million teachers. I can't create 1 million PhDs in China. Who has the best education system in the world? Send 1 million teachers, 1 million prospective PhDs to the US, get them educated there and bring them back. Very smart strategy, right? But again, like I said, these are all solved problems. There's no reason we can't do it in India. We can. In fact, all our kids love to go there. And by the way, the US education system is collapsing because enrollments are going down. People are not interested in doing research in technology and science, right? The time is right for our children to go there. Catch us getting our act together on making this happen.